Before we start today's episode, I just want to say a huge thank you for all the support you've been showing on this series. If you're enjoying the story and want to see more episodes like this, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps this channel grow and motivates me to keep creating bigger and better content for you. Now, sit back, relax, and let's jump right into today's exciting episode. Previously in the story, Piccolo, Kanon, Princess Neon, and Ban entered Multiverse 2 to collect the Dragon Balls before King Arcan could use them to strengthen his conquest across the multiverse. Ban revealed the horrifying truth about Arcan's reign and the countless innocent lives destroyed by his army. Moved by Ban's story, Neon swore to defeat Arcan and free every enslaved world. Before they could leave, Arcan appeared and instantly killed Ban. As he coldly mocked the suffering of entire civilizations, Kanon and his allies challenged him, but they quickly discovered the terrifying truth about Arcan's power. Neon attacked first with everything she had, but her strongest strikes could not harm him. Arcan effortlessly grabbed her by the throat and demonstrated the overwhelming gap between them. Kanon then unleashed Ultra Instinct and launched a relentless assault, yet Arcan stood completely unmoved. Every attack was absorbed without effect. Realizing they had no chance of victory, Piccolo received guidance from the Super Dragon residing within him. The dragon revealed that the only hope of saving the multiverse was to continue gathering the Dragon Balls. Although it meant abandoning his friends, Piccolo was forced to make a painful choice. He teleported away to continue the mission while Kanon and Neon were left behind in Arcan's territory. Arcan defeated Kanon with a single strike and left both warriors unconscious. Instead of killing them, he chose to spare their lives for reasons known only to him before disappearing with a warning. Piccolo arrived in the devastated remains of Multiverse 3, carrying the Dragon Balls of Multiverse 2. There, he reunited with Vegeta and revealed the terrible truth. Kanon and Neon had been defeated by Arcan, a being far stronger than anyone had imagined. The Super Dragon then delivered an even greater revelation. The Dragon Balls from Multiverses 1, 2, and 3 had already been collected, but the remaining Dragon Balls were still needed. The dragon explained that all Dragon Balls were fragments connected to an ancient creator god, the original being responsible for creating all multiverses. If every Dragon Ball from every multiverse could be gathered, the creator god might be restored. However, the dragon warned that this plan carried enormous risks. Restoring the creator god could save all existence or destroy everything completely. Meanwhile, Goku finally regained consciousness and learned the horrifying truth about what had happened after Gohan's death. Consumed by grief and the corrupting influence of Chaos Mode, he had lost control, slaughtered countless enemies, and fought Vegeta in a catastrophic battle that nearly destroyed Multiverse 3. Shocked by his actions, Goku promised never to lose himself again. Yet he also accepted that Chaos Mode was the only power capable of challenging the godlike enemies threatening all existence. With no other path remaining, Goku, Vegeta, and Piccolo decided to continue their mission. Their next destination would be Multiverse 4, where the remaining Dragon Balls awaited. Determined to save Kanon and Neon, stop Arcan, and protect every universe, Goku once again activated Chaos Mode and shattered the barrier between dimensions. As the heroes departed for Multiverse 4, far away in Arcan's domain, Kanon slowly began to regain consciousness. Injured, exhausted, and trapped in enemy territory, he opened his eyes to a future more uncertain than ever before. And now, the story continues. The muscles along his back that had taken the brunt of the impact when Arcan had swatted him away with the casual, contemptuous ease of someone shooing a fly. His eyes opened. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar low, made of rough stone or something like it, the kind of surface that spoke not of architecture but of shelter, improvised safety. A space someone had carved out not because they wanted to be there but because there was nowhere safer to be. Mr. A small voice. Are you okay? Kanon turned his head carefully. A child sat nearby, watching him with eyes that were too old for the face they occupied the eyes of someone who had seen things that children should never see, that had been forced by circumstance to understand concepts that childhood was supposed to protect against. The child was small, maybe 8 or 9, wrapped in clothing that had seen better days. Sitting in that particular stillness that very young people adopt when they've been afraid for a long time and have learned that staying quiet is sometimes the closest thing to safety available. Kanon pushed himself upright. The pain objected to this. He overruled the pain. "Where am I?" he asked, taking in the space around him, the low ceiling, the rough walls, and beyond the edge of the shelter. The suggestion of an open area where other people moved, or sat, or simply existed in the particular way that people exist when survival has become the entire content of their lives. The child shrank back slightly at the directness of the question, and the movement revealed something about them, a reflexive wariness, a learned instinct for reducing their own presence when confronted with anything sudden or loud. "Brother," the child said then, and the word was not directed at Kanon. The child's gaze had shifted to a spot a few feet away, and what was in that gaze was something that went beyond grief, because grief implies an ending, a moment when the loss becomes understood and accepted. And what lived in this child's eyes had not reached acceptance, had perhaps not even reached full understanding yet. "I'm sorry. I couldn't save you." Kanon's eyes moved to where the child was looking. Ban. The man who had fought with everything he had, who had tried to protect his universe, his people, his little brother, who had stood up against something that no amount of courage was sufficient to stand against, and who had paid the final price for having tried. The child was Ban's little brother. Kanon sat very still for a moment, letting that understanding settle. The child was still looking at Ban's face, still speaking to him, still in that particular dimension of grief, where the person who is gone remains present enough that speaking to them feels not like talking to nothing, but like reaching across a distance. Kanon looked at the child. "Are you the only one left?" he asked softly. "From Multiverse 3? The child looked at him, nodded. "Once. Small. Yes." The word was not dramatic. It was simply fact. The last fact remaining after everything else had been removed. "But..." And here something almost like acceptance entered the child's voice. A terrible, exhausted near acceptance that was somehow more devastating than rage would have been. "Don't worry about me. I'll die soon anyway." Kanon's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "From hunger," the child continued, matter-of-factly. "The way children speak when they've had too long to think about things that should frighten them and have arrived at the other side of fear. Or Arkan will find me eventually. He seems to enjoy it. Finding people who are trying to hide. It seems to entertain him." Kanon held the child's gaze for a moment. Then he moved slowly, deliberately, with the careful movements of someone navigating around the pain until he was at the child's level. Not towering over them, present with them. "Don't worry," he said. Not reassurance as dismissal, not the automatic, reflexive comfort of someone who wants a difficult conversation to end. The words carried the quality of something considered, something meant. "I'll defeat Arkan," Kanon said, "and I'll get you out of here." The child looked at him with those old, careful eyes. And then something moved in them that was not quite hope, but was in the neighborhood of hope. The trembling beginning of the thought that hope might be possible, that the word might not be entirely empty. But the child shook their head. "I saw how he killed my brother," they said quietly. "I watched it, and I watched how he dealt with you, how he sent you flying with one punch, like it was nothing." The child's voice didn't waver. "That was the most heartbreaking thing about it. I'm sorry. I believe you mean it, but I don't think you can." Kanon was quiet for a moment. Then, "Hope," he said, "is the last chain of life." The phrase landed in the silence of the small space, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward. "As long as I am alive, I will fight." That is not bravado. That is simply what is true. He rose to his feet. The staff, Ban's staff, the weapon of a warrior who had died defending what he loved, was nearby, and Kanon's eyes found it. "I need to go," he said. "Princess Neon may still be alive, and if she is, every moment I spend here is a moment she's waiting." The child reached out. Small hands closed around the staff and lifted it, extending it toward Kanon. The gesture was simple and enormous. It was the last gift of someone who had nothing left to give, the weapon of a brother, passed to a stranger who carried the only remaining thread of something that might be called possibility. "Don't worry about me," the child said. "Go fight him." Kanon took the staff. The weight of it was not just physical. He could feel everything it had meant, everything it had touched, everything it had been used to defend. He looked at the child for a long moment, long enough to make certain the words he was about to say were received not as comfort, but as commitment. "The happiness your brother wanted for you," he said, "I will give it to you. A beat. I'll take you back to Multiverse 3. When this is over. When Arcan is dead. Not if. When." The word was deliberate. "You have my word." And then, Kanon was gone, moving through the dim shelter and out into the harsher light beyond it. His body, still marked by the punishment Arcan had dealt him, his staff in his hand, his jaw set with the particular expression of someone who has been broken and has decided, consciously and completely, not to let being broken be the end of what they are. Somewhere ahead of him, the gravity of what waited pressed down on the air. Arcan was out there, the king of Multiverse 4, a being of such power that he killed with the casual ease of someone who did it not out of necessity, but because he had never found a reason not to. A being who had turned entire universes into entertainment, who had made suffering into an aesthetic. A being against whom Kanon had already tested himself once, and discovered, painfully and completely, that he was not enough. But that had been once. And Saiyans and the warriors who fought alongside them had a way of not being the same after the moment of defeat as they were before it. The staff was warm in Kanon's grip. The child's eyes were still in his memory, carrying that fragile beginning of hope that he had promised to fulfill. There was no choice to make. There had never been a choice. Kanon moved forward into the uncertain light, and behind him, the child who was the last remnant of a destroyed multiverse watched him go. In that small face, something had shifted. Something had settled into a particular configuration that might, with time, become the thing that keeps people alive when everything logical says they shouldn't be. Belief. Not certainty. Not proof. But the willingness to believe against evidence, against history, against the cold calculus of power and destruction that one person, walking towards something impossible with a borrowed weapon and a promise, might be enough. Might be exactly enough. And somewhere above and between all of this, in the spaces between multiverses where physics dissolved into something that hadn't yet been named, three figures moved through the dimensional barrier as though it were a curtain rather than a wall. The chaos mode power that surrounded Goku was a kind of darkness that was also a kind of light, a contradiction that made sense only in the context of what it had cost to achieve. Vegeta moved beside him, his own power cycling in that constant, restless way that was as natural to him as breathing. Piccolo, freed now from his temporary passenger, moved with the precision of a warrior who knew exactly how to channel his own power, and had long since stopped being surprised by the impossible demands that being around these two Saiyans placed on his definition of possible. They moved toward Multiverse 4. They moved toward Arcan. And above them, somewhere in the impossible architecture of a reality that predated their understanding of what reality was, the souls of four ancient dragons drifted in their separate corners of the multiverse's structure, each carrying within them a fragment of something that had created everything patiently, inexorably, waiting for the moment when all four of them would finally be gathered into one place. The Creator God, who had split himself into pieces so that all multiverses might exist, waited in the way that only the source of all things could wait with absolute certainty, without urgency, without impatience. Because, from his perspective, the most interesting thing about the story that was unfolding was not how it would end. He already knew how it would end. He had known since before knowing was a concept. The most interesting thing was the people in the middle of it. The Saiyan who had looked at his dead son and transformed into something terrible, and then held that terrible thing in check with a promise. The prince who had admitted fear in order to speak truth that needed speaking. The warrior who had walked towards something impossible with a borrowed staff and a word given to a child. The child who had extended hope in the shape of a weapon. These were the kinds of things that could not be predicted by the mathematics of power levels or the geometry of energy. These were the kinds of things that had always surprised him, that had always, in some ineffable way, made the act of creating all of this worth the cost of splitting himself into pieces to do it. He waited, not because he had no choice, but because some things were worth waiting for. And the story was not over yet. Far from it. The hardest parts, the most beautiful parts, the parts where mortals did the thing that only mortals could do, which was to choose the impossible and pursue it anyway, those were still to come. Somewhere in Multiverse 4, a king who had never lost was preparing to face opponents he had already dismissed. And somewhere, in that same multiverse, a warrior, with borrowed time and a borrowed staff, was walking toward him, with the name of a child echoing in his chest like a heartbeat. And on the other side of a dimensional crossing that should have been impossible, 3 warriors moved through the dark between worlds with the particular momentum of people who had decided that impossible was simply a word that described things that hadn't been done yet. The Creator God, in his patient waiting, might almost have smiled. Almost. The battle was not yet here, but it was coming. And everything that had happened, the grief, the promise, the admission of fear, the gift of a child's last hope, all of it was fuel. All of it was weight. All of it was the thing that would determine, in the moment when pure power was not enough, in which way the scales tipped. The Dragon Balls of Multiverse 4 waited. The fate of all multiverses waited. And Son Goku father, Saiyan, the man who had been something monstrous and had chosen to be something else, moved through the dark with his promise held in his chest like a flame. Let's go. The air on planet Zyrex was wrong. There was no other way to describe it. The sky had turned the color of ash. The ground beneath Cannon's boots cracked with old scars of battle, and the silence that hung over the land was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of aftermath, of devastation so complete that even sound had abandoned this place. Cannon moved through the ruins without slowing down. His instincts had carried him here faster than thought. Faster than reason, a pull in his chest that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with the one name that had refused to leave his mind since the moment he stepped into this cursed universe. He had crossed dimensions, shattered every barrier that stood between him and this world, and now his boots crunched over broken stone as his eyes swept the desolation around him. Then he saw her. She was lying against the ruins of what had once been a pillar, her form barely visible beneath the dust and debris, her armor shattered across her shoulders. Princess Nian, the one who had trusted him, the one whose fate had driven him further than any enemy ever had, was dying. Cannon's legs stopped working. He crossed the remaining distance in a blur, dropping to his knees beside her, his hands hovering just above her as if he was afraid to touch her and make the reality more real. Her skin was pale, far too pale, and her breathing came in shallow, fractured intervals. The wounds on her body told the story of a battle that had been horrifically one-sided. Someone had done this. Someone had stood over this woman, this princess, this fighter who had never once shown fear and reduced her to this. Her eyes fluttered. Cannon leaned closer, his jaw locked so tight it could have cracked stone. Her lips moved. One word. A name breathed out with the last reserve of air she had, barely a whisper. Barely even that. Zyrex. And then she went still. The silence that followed was absolute. For one long moment, Cannon did not move. He knelt there beside her, the wind carrying ash across the ruins, his hands clenching slowly into fists against his thighs. Something shifted inside him, not a decision, not a thought, but a fracture. A deep, irreversible fracture in the wall he had spent years building around the part of himself he kept buried. The part that didn't calculate or strategize or hold back. The ground began to tremble. It started beneath his knees, then spread outward in rings, cracks splitting through the earth in every direction as the air around Cannon ignited with energy. His aura erupted green, blazing, overwhelming, a pillar of light that tore upward through the gray sky and illuminated the dead world around him. The sheer force of it sent shockwaves rolling across the plains, shattering the remaining ruins, pulverizing the debris that had already been broken. The very atmosphere seemed to recoil, as if the planet itself recognized what was awakening. Cannon rose to his feet. His hair had shifted, his eyes blazing with a fury that went beyond technique, beyond battle instinct. This was grief translated into power, sorrow converted into something that shook the ground with every breath he took. The legendary Super Saiyan transformation surged through him, raw and unstable and boundless, and yet even as the power threatened to consume the sky above him, The rage inside him did not cool, it deepened. A voice cut through the chaos. My. It was calm, unhurried. The voice of someone who had watched entire civilizations rise and crumble and found the whole affair mildly interesting at best. A figure descended from the sky, not dropping, not falling, but lowering itself with the casual ease of something that had never needed to rush. The demon's presence was cold, a different kind of pressure than Kanon's blazing heat, like the stillness at the bottom of a very deep ocean. His eyes moved from the destruction Kanon's aura had already caused to Kanon himself, and a thin, considering smile touched his lips. A human with power like this, the demon said, tilting his head. Absorbing it would be rather enjoyable. Kanon turned, his eyes locked onto the figure with the focused intensity of a predator that has finally found what it was looking for. The demon Zaimon studied him with genuine curiosity beneath the amusement. I'll admit, I'm surprised. You're human, yet you found your way here, to this universe, to this exact place. His eyes drifted briefly to where Nian lay still behind Kanon. That is no small feat. Kanon moved. He crossed the distance between them like a comet, a streak of green energy leaving a burning trail across the sky, and his fist swung with everything he had. The impact that should have followed never came. Zaimon raised one hand, almost lazily, and the air between them hardened. Kanon's entire body locked in place, suspended mid-motion, frozen not by ice, but by something far more complete. A force that pressed against every muscle, every nerve, making movement not just difficult, but impossible. Kanon strained against it. The veins on his neck stood out. His aura flickered and pushed, and still he could not move an inch. Zaimon lowered his hands slowly. I didn't come here to hurt you. That was not my intention. His voice carried something that might have been genuine regret. But you attacked me. Through locked teeth, Kanon forced the words out. Who are you? Are you working for Arcan? Did you do this to Princess Neon? The smile that crossed Zaimon's face was slow and deliberate. He looked at Kanon the way a collector looks at something rare, something worth appraising before acquiring. My name is Zaimon, he said simply. And yes, I serve Lord Arcan. The ground cracked beneath Kanon's feet as his power surged against the restraint. Zaimon continued, his tone shifting into something almost generous. I'm going to offer you something I don't offer often. Join us. Align yourself with Lord Arcan, and the power you have now, this impressive, volatile strength, it will become something incomparably greater. You have potential that most beings in every multiverse never reach. It would be a waste to leave it unrefined. Kanon's response was immediate and absolute. I don't make alliances with demons. The words came out low, each one carrying the weight of everything he was feeling compressed into controlled syllables. Tell me where Arcan is. Right now. Or I will kill you where you stand. Zaimon laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh, it was genuinely amused, the laughter of someone who had not been surprised in a very long time and was finding the experience refreshing. You can't move, he pointed out pleasantly. You're frozen in place by a force you cannot overcome in your current state, and you're telling me you'll kill me. He shook his head with something like admiration. You want to kill Lord Arcan? You, a human, who entered a foreign universe alone and cannot even free yourself right now. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice held a strange note, something that might have been respect, filtered through amusement. I do admire your spirit, genuinely. The restraint shattered. Kanon exploded forward, his aura tearing the air apart, his voice low and absolute. He killed my princess. The words hit the air like stone. Every sin he has committed, every life he has taken, every world he has broken, he will answer for all of it. The green fire around him surged higher, hotter. And you? You stand in my way right now. That means you will answer first. Zaimon's smile didn't waver as he regarded Kanon with the unhurried patience of something eternal. His eyes moved across the warrior with the calm, measuring precision of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, someone who had long since stopped being impressed by displays of power alone. The green fire roaring around Kanon's body was undeniable in its intensity, raw and blazing and furious. but Simon observed it the way a scholar observes a flame, with interest, not fear. "You walk into my universe," he said, his voice carrying the pleasant, conversational tone of a man discussing something entirely beneath his concern. "Into my domain, a place built from laws you do not understand, and power you have not yet touched the surface of, and you speak about killing me as though the outcome has already been decided." He tilted his head slightly, letting the silence breathe for a moment. "Your power is considerable. I will grant you that, freely stronger than most things I have encountered across a very long existence." A pause. "But considerable is not the same as sufficient. And strength, without the depth to match it, is nothing more than noise." Cannon's answer was a ki blast launched at point-blank range. The energy that left his palm was not merely large, it was catastrophic. A dense, blazing sphere of concentrated destructive force that tore through the air with a sound like the world splitting open, trailing scorched atmosphere behind it, the shockwave alone enough to flatten the broken terrain in every direction. It crossed the distance between them in less than a heartbeat, and struck Simon directly in the center of his chest with the full, unrestrained weight of a legendary warrior's fury. Simon didn't move. The blast pressed against him with everything. It had the energy churning and screaming, the light so intense it turned the fractured sky above Zyrex a blinding white, the force enough to carve continents apart. And then it simply stopped. Piece by piece, the entire attack was drawn inward, absorbed into him as naturally and effortlessly as breathing, the fire dimming, the force dissolving. The catastrophic power that should have erased a mountain range, vanishing without a trace. He glanced down at the point of impact, then at his own hand. He flexed his fingers once, slowly, and looked back at Cannon with an expression of genuine, almost academic disappointment. "Nothing special," he said. "That attack was genuinely underwhelming." Cannon was already moving again. He closed the gap in an instant and unleashed a sustained assault, a relentless barrage of punches, each one backed by the full force of his legendary transformation, each one aimed with precision. The sound of his strikes cutting through the air was like continuous thunder, rapid and unending. The barrage was extraordinary by any measure that mattered in the known universe. Each punch carried enough force to split a moon, delivered with a precision that spoke of countless battles, countless near deaths, countless moments of surpassing what had seemed impossible. The rhythm of it was relentless, a storm of blows that filled the ruined atmosphere of Zyrex with the continuous percussion of pure destructive intent. Each strike aimed with perfect form, perfect timing, perfect commitment. Simon moved around every single one. Not hastily, not desperately, he slipped between the attacks with minimal motion, stepping slightly left, tilting back just enough, turning his body by a fraction of a degree. He made it look effortless. He made it look almost boring. Each devastating strike that should have connected found only empty air, passing through the space where he had stood a half second before with nothing to show for the effort. He did not block, he did not brace. He simply was not where the attacks arrived, over and over and over again, with the quiet inevitability of someone who had transcended the concept of being hit. "There's no real force behind these," Simon observed calmly, ducking beneath a right hook and observing Cannon's follow-through with academic interest. "They're precise, but precision without sufficient power behind it is just movement. You fight like a child who has learned the shape of battle without understanding its weight." Then he countered. One punch. A single, measured strike delivered with no particular urgency, just a sharp, clean extension of his arm, completely unhurried, carrying within it a depth of force that had nothing to do with visible power and everything to do with something far older and far more absolute. It connected with Cannon's midsection, and the result was immediate and total. Cannon left the ground like a meteor being launched in reverse, trailing a streak of disturbed air behind him. And when he hit the surface of Zyrex, the world answered. A massive crater tore open beneath the point of impact, rock and earth exploding outward in a concussive ring, the shockwave flattening everything within 100 meters in an instant, dust rising in enormous walls in every direction. Cannon lay in the crater for a moment. The stillness didn't last. He could feel it clearly now, the gap between them, the distance he could not close with the power he was currently using. Fighting restrained was not an option. Fighting at anything less than everything was not an option. He pressed his palms against the broken earth and pushed himself upright, and as he rose, something changed. He stopped holding back. What followed was not an explosion. It was not a roar of energy or a dramatic surge of visible power. It was something quieter and infinitely more profound, a descent of absolute stillness over his entire consciousness, as though every layer of noise that lived inside him, the grief, the fury, the desperate consuming need had been stripped away one by one until only the core remained, pure, crystalline, aware of everything and attached to nothing. The silver aura that enveloped him did not erupt outward violently. It arrived, settled, like the final note of something vast and ancient resolving into silence. Ultra instinct. The very air around him changed quality. The dust that had been swirling in the aftermath of the last impact hung motionless, suspended as if time itself had paused to acknowledge what was now standing on this broken world. Zaimon went still. For the first time since he had appeared, something moved behind his eyes that was not amusement. He studied the aura wrapping around Kanon with genuine attention, his head tilting slightly, his composure not broken but certainly engaged in a way it had not been before. The silver light was not something he could dismiss. It was not something that fit neatly into the categories he used to evaluate the things he encountered. It demanded to be seen for exactly what it was. Extraordinary, he said quietly. You possess power that mirrors the angels themselves. A pause. You are full of surprises, human. Far across the multiverse, in a space where the architecture of reality was built differently, another confrontation was forming. Boreas stood with the stillness of absolute authority, and beside him the Grand Priest waited with carefully concealed unease. The weight of what was about to happen pressed down on the surrounding space like a physical thing. It is time, Boreas said. We move to planet Zyrex. Prepare yourself. The Grand Priest kept his voice measured. Must we go immediately, my lord? Is there no preparation required? Something cold moved through Boreas' expression. There is something I must attend to first. What manner of task, my lord? The Grand Priest asked carefully. The look Borea turned on him was not angry. It was something quieter than anger, and far more dangerous, a patience that had boundaries, and a reminder that asking questions was an activity with consequences. Ask fewer questions, Borea said. If you ask too many, you may not live to follow my orders. Is that understood? He let the silence hold for exactly long enough to make his point. Before Zyrex, we go to Multiverse 2. The Grand Priest's composure fractured slightly despite himself. But my Lord Multiverse 2 is Lord Arcan's domain. Boreas' smile was the most unsettling thing about him. Exactly, he said. Now stop thinking about it. And back on the broken surface of Zyrex, beneath a sky that had forgotten what calm felt like, two forces stood facing each other, one burning with silver transcendence, one carrying the cold certainty of something ancient and hungry, and the world between them held its breath. The air on the battlefield still tasted of ash and ruin, where moments before the ground had shaken beneath the weight of colliding forces powerful enough to reshape geography. A suffocating silence had descended, the kind of silence that does not bring peace, but instead announces that something terrible has just finished, and something worse has not yet begun. It pressed down upon the three warriors who remained standing like a physical thing, dense and cold, wrapping around their shoulders and refusing to let them stand fully upright beneath it. Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo. Three beings who between them had faced the destruction of worlds, the erasure of timelines, the wrath of gods, and yet in this particular moment, on this particular ground, each of them carried something heavier than any of that. Gohan lay still behind them. Goku could not look at him directly. Every time his gaze drifted toward his son's unmoving form, something fundamental inside him fractured, not the clean break of bone, which heals, but the deeper kind. The kind that no transformation can reach and no training can prepare a man for. He had felt the exact moment Gohan fell. Had felt it the way you feel a light go out in a room you are standing in sudden, total wrong. A cold dread had moved through him then that had nothing to do with battle. and everything to do with being a father who had arrived too late. He clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened. The energy that should have answered him, that golden, roaring surge that had defined him since boyhood, that had carried him through every impossible fight the universe had seen fit to place in front of him, sputtered, flickered, died before it could catch. He pushed harder, reaching past the exhaustion, past the raw and scraped empty feeling that had settled into every muscle and every cell. Nothing answered. The chaos mode transformation. That terrifying new ceiling of power they had only recently discovered. That form which had seemed to promise that there was always another level to reach it, refused him completely. His body had given the battlefield everything it possessed, and the battlefield had taken all of it. Beside him, Vegeta's experience was identical, though his response to it was different in character. Where Goku's frustration turned inward, Vegeta's burned outward, a barely contained fury directed at his own limitations. At the unacceptable reality that the Saiyan Prince was standing on a battlefield unable to access his full power. His jaw was locked, his shoulders were rigid with the effort of not showing what he felt. He attempted the transformation twice, and twice the energy rose partway and then collapsed, like a flame in a room without air. The second failure cost him something visible, a tightening around his eyes that anyone who knew him would recognize, not as pain, but as the specific anguish of a pride that has been confronted with its own boundary. Piccolo stood slightly apart from both of them, watching. His ancient eyes moved between the two Saiyans with the measured calm of someone who has lived long enough to recognize a crisis before it announces itself. He was the oldest consciousness among them in terms of accumulated experience, and that age expressed itself now, not as weakness, but as an almost unnatural stillness, the stillness of someone who has learned that panic accomplishes nothing, and that clear sight in a dark moment is worth more than power. He observed the trembling in Goku's fingers, the rigid line of Vegeta's neck, the way neither of them would speak aloud what was already obvious. "Neither of you can transform," Piccolo said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of voice that fills space without raising itself. "Your bodies have nothing left. That is why the power refuses to come." He paused for exactly one beat, letting the words settle. "And if the power will not come, then tell me plainly, how do we reach Multiverse 2? The question dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Vegeta's gaze cut sideways to the Namekian, sharp and measuring. It was not a question he wanted to confront, and the fact that he had no answer made him want to confront it even less. "Your inner dragon," Vegeta said after a moment, his voice pitched low, deliberate, each syllable carrying the careful precision of someone probing for a solution rather than admitting defeat. "The power that lives inside you. Can you not reach it? Draw on it now?" Something moved through Piccolo's expression at that, not quite grief, not quite resignation, but something that existed in the space between them. He closed his eyes. Those watching could almost feel him reaching inward, pressing against a vast and familiar door, the door that had always opened for him before. His concentration was total and visible. The antennae above his head were perfectly still. The door did not open. "I have already tried," Piccolo said. The words came out stripped of anything but fact. "It is not responding. Not now. Whatever reserves it requires, I do not currently have access to them." The silence that returned after that was larger than the one before it. Goku turned and looked at Gohan. Not a glance, a real look. The kind you give someone when you are trying to memorize them because something in you fears what comes next. His son's face was pale and still, the breathing shallow and uneven, his body bearing the accumulated evidence of a battle that had demanded more than it should ever have been allowed to take. And Goku, the man who had stood before Frieza on a dying planet, who had spoken calmly to Beerus while the earth trembled, who had squared his shoulders against the embodiment of erasure itself, felt something behind his eyes that he had no name for and no defense against. "Gohan," he said, barely a whisper. The name alone cost him something. "I'm sorry. I couldn't save you. I should have been faster. I should have been stronger." The words hung in the air. Anyone watching would have seen what they did to him, the slight collapse of his posture, the way the brightness in his eyes dimmed for a single unguarded moment. Goku's son, who had given the universe back to itself more times than history had properly recorded, stood over his son and apologized to the silence, because there was no other way to hold what he felt. Piccolo's voice returned firm, unbending, carrying the authority of absolute refusal to allow despair to take root. "We will bring him back, Goku. That is not a hope. That is a fact we are going to make true. No comfort in the words, no softness. Just the unshakable certainty of someone who has decided that a thing will happen and is now simply working toward it. But we cannot make it true from here. We move, now." And then something shifted in Goku's face. The grief did not leave. It never entirely leaves, but something moved behind his eyes, something sharp and sudden. His gaze went distant, in the precise way those who knew him had learned to recognize. The deep inward focus of instant transmission, that extraordinary technique that required not speed but sensitivity. His ki extending outward in all directions, like invisible thread cast across the fabric of space, searching through the noise of the cosmos for a single familiar signal. His brow drew together, held, then released. "I found him." Vegeta's posture changed instantly. "Found who, Kakarot?" "Canon." The word arrived with total certainty. No qualification, no doubt. It has to be him. And whatever is near him, I don't like what I'm sensing. We need to move immediately. Vegeta's eyes narrowed as he processed this, running calculations with the speed of a mind shaped entirely around combat. "We cannot take Gohan," he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the emotional weight of the moment. Not cruelty pragmatism, the kind forged from decades of understanding what battles cost when they are entered poorly. He needs care that a battlefield cannot provide. Taking him with us in this state could kill him. "I know," Goku said, simply, without argument, because some truths are too important to argue against, even when they hurt. His senses stretched further, pressing past Canon's signal, moving into the surrounding space. What they found there made something cold move along his spine. "There is another presence near Canon," he said carefully, his voice dropping half a register. "Something dark. Something that does not feel like anything I have encountered before." His eyes found Vegeta's. "It is not Princess Nian." Piccolo's antennae shifted forward the smallest movement, barely perceptible, but for those who knew him, it was the equivalent of every alarm he possessed activating at once. "Then every second we spend standing here is a second Canon does not have. Let's go." They moved with the seamless efficiency of warriors who have fought side by side long enough that communication has become unnecessary. Gohan was carried with care, his unconscious form handled with the reverence due to someone who had given everything in service of something larger than himself. Princess Neon's base received him, and the recovery chamber sealed around him with a precise and quiet hiss. Technology and intention combining to offer the protection that none of them had been able to provide on the battlefield. Goku stood at the chamber for one moment, looking at his son's face through the surface. One moment. Then he stepped back. His fingers rose to his forehead. The world came apart and reassembled itself. Multiverse 3 received them like a wound receiving a blade. The sky was fractured, not metaphorically, but visibly, as though the fabric of this particular reality had been subjected to forces it was never constructed to withstand. And the cracks had not been repaired, because there was no one left with either the power or the inclination to repair them. Light came through at wrong angles, bending around invisible wounds in the atmosphere as though the laws that governed its movement had been quietly suspended. The air itself felt unstable, charged with the specific electric tension that lingers in spaces where enormous energies have clashed and not fully dissipated, the kind of charge that settles into the skin and raises every instinct a warrior possesses to its highest point of alertness, without providing any single visible cause for alarm. It was the feeling of standing inside an aftermath that had not yet decided whether it was finished. The landscape was a geography of total devastation. Craters yawned across the terrain like open wounds in the earth itself, deep enough to swallow entire structures whole, their edges jagged and raw from impacts that had not been gentle. Debris fields stretched in every direction to every horizon, the remnants of a world that had been asked to witness something beyond its capacity and had paid for the privilege with its own substance. In scattered pockets across the ruined ground, Gravity had apparently ceased to function with any reliability. Rocks and fragments of earth drifted at eye level like objects that had forgotten which direction was down, turning slowly in the dead air with an eerie, weightless patience. The sky above all of it remained broken, light coming through the fractures in it at angles that made the whole scene feel like something observed through shattered glass. And at the epicenter of all of it, Kanon was still on his feet. The fact of it struck harder than almost anything else in the scene. His body was a document written in punishment. His clothing had been reduced to ruins. Every visible surface of skin mapped with the evidence of impacts that would have ended a lesser warrior before they had time to register what was happening. The marks of the battle were not merely physical. There was a quality to his stillness that spoke of someone who had pushed through the outer boundary of what the body is supposed to endure and had found, on the other side of it, not collapse, but something quieter and more fundamental. His breathing came in the deliberate, controlled cadence of someone managing pain rather than recovering from it. Each exhale measured, each inhale a conscious act of will rather than a reflex. But his eyes had not changed. That was the thing that mattered. That was the thing that told the true story of what Kanon was, beneath the exhaustion and the damage and the impossible odds he had been standing against alone. His eyes still carried that quality, something beneath defiance, something beneath stubbornness, something that those two words were not quite large enough to contain. It was a foundational quality, the kind that does not arrive through training or technique, but through a decision made somewhere deep and private, a decision that once made cannot be unmade. Kanon had decided before the fight, or in its earliest moments, or in some moment between blows when falling would have been the easier and more reasonable choice, that he was not going to fall while a single option remained available to him. And that decision had held through everything the battle had thrown at it. He was still standing because he had decided to be. Before him, Ximon occupied the space between them in a way that was more than physical presence. Standing near Ximon was an experience rather than merely an observation. The demon did not simply exist in the space he occupied. He contaminated it, radiating something ancient and fundamentally incorrect outward from himself in all directions. It was like standing near a wound in the natural order that had grown old enough to develop a personality and intentions of its own. The wrongness of him pressed against the senses on a level that had nothing to do with power readings or key signatures, and everything to do with something more primitive. The deep, instinctive recognition that what stood before you was something that healthy existence was not supposed to accommodate. Kanon drew himself together. Whatever reserves still answered his call, he reached for all of them simultaneously. The energy began to build in his hands, visible, physical. The air around his palms compressing and brightening as the technique took shape, folding inward, as though the atmosphere itself understood what was being asked of it and was cooperating. The ground under his feet registered it first, fracturing outward from the concentrated pressure in expanding rings that spread across the already devastated terrain like cracks moving through old stone. His jaw was set. His focus had narrowed to a single absolute point. Every remaining fragment of everything he possessed was being directed toward this one release, this one moment, this one attempt to end what he had been standing against alone for longer than any of this should have taken. The name of the technique left him like a final verdict. Dragon Kanon. What left his hands was extraordinary in a way that transcended the ordinary language of power. Goku, standing at a distance with Vegeta and Piccolo, pulled in a breath that he did not consciously decide to take. He had produced and survived and measured more concentrated energy than perhaps any being in the recorded history of the multiverse, and he was not easily impressed by the shape of power anymore. But this was different. The beam moved through the fractured air of Multiverse 3 with a quality that resisted easy categorization. The power was immense, yes, but power alone was not what made it remarkable. It carried something within it, sang along frequencies that Goku's battle-sharpened senses had encountered only rarely, as though the technique were not merely an attack but something alive and purposeful in its own right, something that had its own relationship with its target beyond the simple physics of energy meeting resistance. It was beautiful in the specific way that only truly dangerous things can be beautiful completely devastatingly, without apology. "That technique," Goku said, his voice carrying wonder that was entirely genuine and entirely unperformed. "I want to learn that." Zaimon raised his hand. The gesture carried the casual contempt of absolute certainty, the movement of something that had absorbed every attack directed at it throughout this battle and had emerged from each absorption, not merely unharmed, but measurably stronger. Something that had developed a reasonable expectation that this pattern would continue indefinitely. His expression held the particular arrogance of a creature that has not yet encountered a reason to revise its self-assessment. The dragon cannon made contact, and the certainty cracked. It did not shatter, not immediately, but the fracture was visible and real. The energy pushed back against the absorption in a way that Zaimon's widening eyes made absolutely clear had not happened before. Not once, not in any prior encounter. His feet were moving backward, not by choice, by force. The already destroyed earth beneath him carved into furrows as he was pressed genuinely, physically pressed, and something crossed his face that his expression had not previously contained. Uncertainty. Wait. The word escaped before he could prevent it, before whatever composure governed his speech could intercept it. Can I actually? The detonation consumed the sentence entirely. The shockwave was total and immediate. The earth did not shake, it heaved. It groaned at a geological level, and then it split apart in a radius that swallowed hundreds of meters in every direction at once, the force moving outward faster than the eye could track it. Light replaced sky. Sound stopped being sound and became a physical wall moving at speed. Goku, Vegeta, and Piccolo were driven backward by the pressure front even as they planted their feet and braced, the force rolling over them and past them like a second catastrophe arriving directly on top of the first. When the light finally surrendered and the smoke began its slow, deliberate climb upward, Kanon was standing in his base form. Ultra instinct had dissolved from around him, the silver gone from his eyes, the elevated state unraveled back into the ordinary. His body now operating on whatever remained after every transformation and every technique and every act of will had been spent in sequence. Physiologically, there was no accounting for why he was vertical, but he was. He had not fallen. He gave everything, Goku said quietly. That attack was extraordinary. Then Zaimon walked out of the smoke. Half of his body had been erased by the detonation. The left arm was absent, not destroyed in any visible sense, simply gone, the space where it had been occupied by nothing. The left portion of his torso, gone. Half of his face, gone. The edges of each absence were clean, in a way that was somehow more disturbing than if they had been ragged. As though the dragon cannon had not torn through him, but had simply decided that certain portions of him no longer needed to exist and had acted accordingly. What remained moved forward through the dissipating smoke with the same unhurried patience it had carried throughout the entire battle, as though the condition of its own body was a matter of complete indifference. Vegeta stared. Piccolo stared. Goku, who had witnessed things that had broken every framework the possible had ever offered him, processed what stood before him with visible, unguarded disbelief. "He survived that," Vegeta said. The words arrived not as a statement of fact, but as an involuntary response to a reality that was declining to follow any recognizable rule. "Half of him is simply gone," Goku said, his voice slow and careful, as though the words needed to be placed down rather than spoken. "Nothing that lives can continue from that. Nothing should be able to." And then Zaimon began to regenerate. The flesh moved across absence and filled it. Bone rebuilt itself from nothing visible. The process was unhurried and almost meditative, carrying the patience of something that regarded the destruction of its own physical form as one temporary configuration among many inconvenient in the most minor sense, already being corrected, ultimately irrelevant to any meaningful calculation. Within moments he stood complete again, rolling his restored shoulder with the expression of someone who has recalled a minor irritation and decided it does not warrant further attention. Piccolo's voice arrived, stripped of everything except urgency. "He will kill Kanon. We move now. There is nothing left to discuss." Zaimon turned his restored eyes toward Kanon with the unhurried patience of something that has already written the ending and is simply walking the remaining distance toward it. "Your technique deserved the respect I gave it," he said, his voice smooth and fully restored along with the rest of him. But respect is not an extension of life. You have spent everything you carried, human. He began moving forward with purpose. Now you die. Vegeta was already there. He arrived between Ximon and Cannon with a crack of displaced air that functioned as both arrival and announcement. His cape snapped sharp from the force of his materialization. His eyes found Ximon and locked onto him. And in that instant, the Saiyan Prince was the complete and undiluted expression of everything his lineage had ever meant. Immovable, contemptuous, absolutely certain of his own purpose in this moment. Only cowards pursue the wounded, Vegeta said. Each word landed with the weight of something that had been decided long before it was spoken. If you carry even a fragment of genuine pride, face a Saiyan Prince. Behind him, despite the weight of everything, Goku allowed himself the smallest grin. You beat me to it, Vegeta. I was on my way. A beat, perfectly timed. But you can finish it. I suppose you'll do. Are you mocking me, Kakarot? Not entirely a question. Would I do that to you? Ximon studied Vegeta with the clinical, unhurried attention of something cataloging an unknown specimen before deciding how to classify it. Saiyan Prince, he said, the title passing through his mouth like something being evaluated and found lacking. I have met Saiyan Pride before, in various forms and various warriors. It has never once given me a reason to adjust my assessment of the species. His gaze moved across Vegeta without acceleration. You will be no different from the human who stood before you. I see nothing here that warrants a different expectation. The corner of Vegeta's mouth moved. Not a smile. Something older and colder than a smile. Something that did not reassure but promised very specific things about the immediate future. You will, he said simply. The transformation that followed did not begin with noise or spectacle. It began as a deepening of the pressure around him, a compression of the already damaged atmosphere, as though the air had suddenly understood that something of consequence was about to occupy it and was adjusting accordingly. The unstable environment of Multiverse 3 added a new layer of distress to its existing injuries as the energy built. Vegeta closed his eyes for exactly the duration of one breath. He opened them, and the Ultra Ego came into existence around him like a verdict being delivered. It was not gold, it was not silver. It existed in its own category, entirely a dark radiance, an aura that consumed the light around it rather than adding to it, that dominated the atmosphere rather than illuminating it. It roared outward, not with the brightness of fire, but with the authority of a declaration. The power of a being who has converted every defeat, every humiliation, every forced acknowledgement of someone else's superiority into something harder and more dangerous than any of those experiences had been on their own. The ground beneath Vegeta's feet did not fracture under the pressure. It was simply reduced to powder, the transformation dispensing with it as a minor inconvenience. The fractured sky above him darkened further, as though the aura were drawing the available shadows down around itself to complete the picture it was making. Ultra Ego. Not the transcendent peace of a deity's perfect instinct. The absolute authority of a prince who had decided, in this moment, on this ground, against this enemy, that it ends now. Ximon looked at Vegeta, and in the demon's ancient calculating eyes, something shifted. Something that had not moved during the entire battle until this precise moment. Something that, if pressed to give it a name, could only be called recognition. The recognition of something standing in front of you that has earned, through means that cannot be dismissed or minimized, the right to be taken seriously. The air between them crackled. The earth between them trembled. And Vegeta smiled. I'm trying my best to bring the next chapters as fast as possible. So, make sure to support me, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to like the video. Thanks for watching, guys.